The sharp, salty wind tore through the lone figure standing on the jagged cliffs overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. Beneath the dim, cloud-shrouded moon, the waves churned violently, mirroring the turmoil in the survivor's mind. Nathan Grayson had returned to the coastline where it all began, desperate for answers or absolution. Nathan was a wiry man in his early 30s, his once vibrant blue eyes now dull and haunted. It had been 6 months since the Elysian sank, dragging most of its crew and passengers to a watery grave. Against all odds, Nathan had survived, clinging to a shattered piece of the hull until a fishing trawler discovered him days later. He was heralded as a miracle, a man who had defied the wrath of the sea. But what no one knew, what he dared not speak of, was the presence that had clung to him ever since. The small coastal town of Ravensport had not changed much since Nathan's youth. Its cobblestone streets and gaslit lanterns seemed frozen in time, giving the town a ghostly charm that was both comforting and unsettling. Yet, Nathan couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him. As he trudged through the misty streets, he caught glimpses of shadows darting just beyond his peripheral vision. He turned abruptly, heart pounding, but each time he was met with nothing more than the empty fog. He reached the old boarding house where he had rented a room for the week. Mrs. Whitmore, the elderly innkeeper, greeted him warmly, though her smile faltered as she took in his pale, haggard appearance. "Rough night, dear?" she asked, her voice laced with genuine concern. Nathan forced a weak smile. "Just tired, ma'am. The sea air. It stirs old memories." She nodded knowingly, but her eyes lingered on him for a moment too long. "Well, if you need anything, you just holler." That night, Nathan lay in the creaky bed, staring at the ceiling as the sound of waves crashing against the cliffs filled the silence. Just as sleep began to claim him, a low, mournful moan echoed through the room. Nathan bolted upright, his breath caught in his throat. The sound didn't come from outside, it came from within the walls. He strained to listen, his pulse thundering in his ears. A faint, rhythmic creak followed, like the groan of wet wood being compressed. He stepped out of bed, his bare feet cold against the wooden floor. Grabbing the oil lamp from the bedside table, he lit it with trembling hands. The warm glow barely penetrated the oppressive darkness. As he crept toward the corner of the room, the creaking intensified, accompanied by the distinct sound of dripping water. When he reached the source, he froze. Water pooled at the base of the wall, seeping through the cracks. Yet there had been no rain for days. Nathan crouched down, his hand hesitating above the wet floorboards. Before he could touch it, a chilling voice whispered behind him. "Why did you leave me?" Nathan whipped around, the lamp nearly slipping from his grasp. The room was empty, but the voice, low, guttural, and full of anguish, seemed to linger, vibrating in the still air. By morning, Nathan was a wreck. He avoided Mrs. Whitmore's questioning gaze and wandered into the town, hoping the daylight would dispel the night's horrors. At the docks, the familiar smell of fish and brine greeted him, but the bustling atmosphere felt muted. As he stared out at the endless expanse of water, memories of the Elysian resurfaced. Its proud sails cutting through the waves, the laughter of the crew, and the storm that had swallowed them all. Nathan squeezed his eyes shut, trying to banish the image of the sailor who had been at his side in those final moments. John? Or was it James? The name was a blur, but the man's face was etched in his mind. Hollow cheeks, a wiry beard, and eyes wide with terror as the sea claimed him. "You left me to drown." The voice was louder this time, clear and accusatory. Nathan spun around and came face to face with a figure he could scarcely believe was real. The ghost of the sailor stood before him, water dripping from his tattered uniform. His skin was pale and bloated, his eyes sunken into dark hollows that oozed seawater. The sight was both ghastly and mesmerizing. Nathan staggered back, tripping over a rope coil. No, it can't be," he stammered. "You survived while we perished," the ghost rasped, each word heavy with bitterness. "You stole our chance to live." Nathan's mind reeled. "I didn't steal anything. I fought to survive, just like everyone else." The ghost stepped closer, his wet boots leaving no sound on the wooden planks. "You could have saved me," he said, his voice breaking into a guttural growl. "But you let go." Nathan shook his head violently, tears streaming down his face. "I couldn't. I was barely holding on myself." The ghost's hollow eyes narrowed. "Then you'll know what it feels like to be dragged down." Nathan woke with a start, gasping for air. He was no longer at the docks but back in his room at the boarding house. The morning light streamed through the window, and for a moment, he wondered if it had all been a dream. But then he felt it, the dampness on his clothes, the faint smell of brine clinging to his skin. And on the bedside table, etched into the wood as if by a sharp blade, were 4 chilling words. "You owe me life." Nathan stared at the message, his body trembling. He knew one thing for certain. The ghost wasn't bound to the sea. It was bound to him. Nathan sat on the edge of the bed, his pulse thundering in his ears as he stared at the words carved into the wood. "You owe me life." The letters seemed to shimmer, their edges damp as if freshly etched by unseen hands. He reached out to touch the table, half expecting it to vanish like a mirage, but the grooves were real, the dampness chilling his fingertips. He jerked his hand back and stumbled toward the window. Outside, Ravensport's quiet morning was coming to life. Children darted down cobblestone streets, fishermen prepared their nets, and shopkeepers opened their shutters. The world looked normal, but Nathan knew better. He wasn't alone. By midday, Nathan found himself at the town's modest library, poring over old maritime records. The librarian, a bespectacled woman named Eleanor, noticed his frantic demeanor. "Looking for something specific?" she asked, her voice soft but curious. Nathan hesitated. How could he explain without sounding insane? I'm researching shipwrecks near Ravensport. Any history of hauntings tied to them?" Eleanor's brows furrowed, but she nodded. "There've been tales. Superstitions passed down about restless sailors, cursed ships, that sort of thing. Anything in particular you're hoping to find?" Nathan thought of the ghost's waterlogged face and the words it had spoken. "I'm trying to find records of the Elysian." Her expression softened with understanding. "Ah, the shipwreck 6 months ago. You're the survivor, aren't you?" Nathan nodded reluctantly. Eleanor scanned the shelves, eventually pulling a dusty ledger from the archives. "This covers most shipwrecks from the past century. The Elysian might be listed here." As Nathan flipped through the brittle pages, his stomach churned. The ledger contained names of lost ships, their crew, and accounts from survivors, if there were any. Then he found it. The Elysian, 1884. Passenger schooner lost to violent storm. Crew 12. Passengers 28. Survivor Nathan Grayson. Beneath the record was a footnote. Local lore suggests lingering spirits tied to lost seafarers. Survivors' accounts unverified. Nathan clenched his jaw. His account had been dismissed, his nightmares trivialized. But the ghost was no figment of imagination. It was real, and it wanted something. That night, Nathan sat in his room, staring at the carved words on the table. He hadn't slept since the haunting at the docks. Every shadow seemed alive, every creak of the boarding house amplified in his mind. He lit a single candle and sat with his back to the door, facing the window. "What do you want from me?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. The room seemed to chill instantly. The flame flickered, casting elongated shadows on the walls. A voice rose from the silence, low and guttural. "You know what I want." Nathan turned, his breath caught in his throat. The ghost stood by the door, water pooling beneath its feet. Its hollow eyes bore into Nathan's, filled with malice and despair. "I don't understand," Nathan cried. "You left us," the ghost hissed, stepping closer. "You survived while we sank. The sea spared you, but not us." "Why?" Nathan shook his head violently. "I didn't have a choice. The storm, it took everything. I barely survived." The ghost's face twisted with rage, its features distorting into something monstrous. "The storm didn't spare you out of mercy. It spared you for me." Nathan backed into the corner, his chest heaving. "What do you mean?" "You owe me your life, Nathan Grayson, and I'll take it piece by piece until the debt is paid." The next morning, Nathan awoke on the floor, shivering and drenched in seawater. His dreams had been filled with violent images of crashing waves and the ghost's vengeful gaze. He staggered to his feet, his body aching as if he'd been tossed about by the storm all over again. His clothes were soaked, and his skin smelled of brine. But the room showed no signs of water. The floor was dry, the window latched shut. He left the boarding house in a daze, avoiding Mrs. Whitmore's concerned questions. He needed answers, and there was only one place left to look: the wreck site of the Elysian. Nathan hired a small fishing boat, paying the captain handsomely to take him to the coordinates of the Elysian's final resting place. The captain, an old man with weathered skin and a superstitious glint in his eye, hesitated. "You're playing with fire, lad," he warned. "Wrecks are graveyards. You don't disturb the dead." "I don't have a choice," Nathan replied grimly. The journey was long and tense, the sea unnaturally calm. When they reached the location, Nathan stared into the water, his reflection wavering on the surface. He imagined the wreck below, the skeletal remains of the ship and its doomed passengers entombed in the dark. As the boat idled, the water began to ripple. Nathan frowned, looking around for signs of wind or movement, but the surface churned unnaturally, forming a whirlpool. The ghost's voice echoed across the waves. "You've returned." Nathan staggered back, clutching the boat's railing. The captain swore under his breath, crossing himself repeatedly. A hand shot out of the water, bloated, pale, and dripping. It grasped the side of the boat, pulling itself upward. The ghost's face emerged, its eyes filled with rage. "You cannot escape me, Nathan. The sea will claim what it's owed." Nathan grabbed an oar, swinging it at the apparition, but it passed through harmlessly, splashing into the water. The ghost's laughter was cold and mocking. "You can't fight me," it growled. "You belong to me now." The captain turned the boat around, his face pale as he steered them back to shore. Nathan sat in silence, his hands trembling. The ghost's words echoed in his mind. Back in Ravensport, Nathan wandered aimlessly until he found himself at the old church. Desperate, he sought out Father Callahan, the town's priest. "Father," Nathan began, his voice shaky, "I need help. I'm being haunted." The priest listened intently as Nathan recounted the events of the past weeks. When he finished, Callahan nodded solemnly. "The sea is a mysterious force," he said, "and those who die within it often leave behind restless spirits. If this sailor seeks vengeance, you must find a way to appease him, or risk being consumed by his wrath." Nathan's heart sank. How? How do I appease someone who wants my life?" The priest placed a hand on his shoulder. "Perhaps the answer lies in the wreck. There may be something tying him to this world. A relic, a memory, a sin unpunished. You must uncover the truth before it's too late. Nathan left the church with a heavy heart. He had to return to the wreck, this time prepared to face whatever secrets it held. As he walked back to the boarding house, he felt the familiar chill of the ghost's presence. He quickened his pace, but the whisper reached his ear before he could escape. You'll never find peace, Nathan. Not until I take what's mine. The words sent shivers down his spine. He clenched his fists, determination replacing his fear. If the ghost wanted him to pay a debt, he would uncover the truth, even if it meant facing the horrors of the deep once more. Nathan's nights had become a torment of restless hours, plagued by vivid nightmares of the ghostly sailor and the chilling whispers of the sea. Each night felt like a descent into madness, his mind fraying at the edges. But amidst the fear, one thought prevailed. He had to return to the Elysian's wreck and uncover the truth. Armed with Father Callahan's advice and a growing determination, Nathan prepared for a perilous journey into the depths. He wasn't sure what he'd find, but he knew he couldn't run from the ghost's wrath forever. Nathan found a diver willing to accompany him, an eccentric man named Amos, who had a reputation for taking on dangerous jobs for the right price. Amos was a stout, broad-shouldered man with a grizzled beard and a piercing gaze. I've heard the stories about the Elysian, Amos said as they loaded equipment onto the small boat. You're either brave or mad to want to go down there. Maybe both, Nathan replied grimly. The plan was simple. Amos would guide the dive while Nathan searched for anything that might be tied to the ghost's grudge. They reached the coordinates early in the morning, the sea calm and unnervingly quiet. The water was icy as they descended, their movements slow and deliberate. Visibility was poor, the sunlight fading into a murky green haze. Nathan's breathing echoed loudly in his helmet, each breath a reminder of how fragile his existence was in the deep. As they neared the wreck, the Elysian loomed like a skeleton in the darkness, its broken hull encrusted with barnacles and draped in seaweed. Stay close, Amos said, his voice crackling through the communication device. Nathan nodded, scanning the wreckage for anything out of the ordinary. The ship felt alive, its jagged edges and shattered timbers whispering stories of its violent demise. Nathan's flashlight caught something glinting in the silt, a metal box, half buried near the captain's quarters. He motioned to Amos, who helped pry it loose. The box was heavy, its surface corroded but intact. Inside, Nathan found a collection of personal effects: a journal, a locket, and a small silver medallion etched with a compass. The locket held a faded photograph of a woman, her eyes filled with sorrow. Looks like it belonged to someone important, Amos said. Nathan's fingers trembled as he opened the journal. The pages were water-damaged, but some entries were still legible. One passage caught his eye. The storm grows worse by the hour. The passengers pray, but I fear the sea will claim us all. If this is to be my end, I only wish I could see her one last time. The entry was signed by a name that sent shivers down Nathan's spine. James Harrow. It's him, Nathan whispered. Who? Amos asked. The ghost. The sailor haunting me. Before Amos could respond, the water around them grew colder, and a low, mournful wail echoed through the depths. A shadow passed over them, blotting out the dim light from above. Nathan froze as a figure materialized before him, James Harrow, his form twisted and spectral. You shouldn't have come here, the ghost growled, his voice reverberating through the water. Nathan clutched the medallion instinctively. What do you want from me? You took my chance at redemption, Harrow said, his eyes glowing with fury. I died with unfinished business, and now I'm bound to this cursed existence. You must pay the price. Amos backed away, his hands trembling. We need to get out of here, but Nathan held his ground, his fear giving way to desperation. "What unfinished business? Tell me and I'll make it right." The ghost's expression softened, a flicker of anguish breaking through his rage. "Find her," he said, his voice heavy with sorrow. "Tell her I never stopped loving her." Before Nathan could ask who she was, Harrow let out an anguished cry, and the water erupted into chaos. The currents surged violently, dragging Nathan and Amos away from the wreck. Debris swirled around them, and the ghost's form dissolved into the darkness. "Hold on," Amos shouted, grabbing Nathan's arm and pulling him toward the surface. They broke through the waves, gasping for air as the boat came into view. The captain hauled them aboard, his face pale with fear. "What happened down there?" he demanded. Nathan clutched the medallion, his heart racing. "I found him, and I know what I need to do." Back on shore, Nathan returned to the library, clutching Harrow's journal and the locket. He showed them to Eleanor, who examined the photograph carefully. "This woman," she said, pointing to the image, "looks familiar. There's a portrait in the town hall archives that matches her." They hurried to the archives, where Eleanor unearthed a faded painting of the same woman. The plaque beneath it read, "Margaret Harrow, 1849 to 1922. Beloved wife and mother." Nathan's breath caught in his throat. Margaret Harrow, James's wife. "Did she live in Ravensport?" he asked. "Yes," Eleanor replied. "Her family was prominent here, but she never remarried after her husband was lost at sea. Some say she spent her life waiting for him to return." Nathan's chest tightened with guilt. James Harrow had perished, leaving behind a wife who never stopped grieving. And now his ghost was trapped, yearning for closure. That night, Nathan returned to his room, determined to find a way to fulfill Harrow's request. But as he laid the journal and locket on the table, the air grew cold. The candle flickered violently, and Harrow's ghost appeared once more, his form more menacing than ever. "You have the means to end this," Harrow snarled. "But time is running out." "I'm trying," Nathan shouted. "I found her. I know who she is." "Then act quickly," the ghost growled, "or you'll join me in the depths." The room shook violently, and Harrow vanished, leaving Nathan trembling in the eerie silence. With renewed urgency, Nathan set out to learn more about Margaret Harrow's life. He discovered that her descendants still lived in Ravensport, including a great-granddaughter named Abigail. Nathan found Abigail at her small bookshop, a kind woman with Margaret's striking features. When he showed her the locket and journal, her eyes filled with tears. "This was his," she whispered. "I've heard stories about James, but I never knew the details of his fate." Nathan hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. He wanted me to find you. He wanted you to know that he never stopped loving Margaret." Abigail nodded, her expression a mix of sadness and gratitude. "Thank you for bringing this to me. Perhaps it's what he needed to find peace." But Nathan wasn't so sure. The ghost's rage still lingered, and he couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. Nathan sat across from Abigail in her cozy bookshop, the smell of aged pages filling the air. Abigail turned the locket over in her hands, her eyes glistening with unspoken emotions. "My great-grandmother Margaret spoke of James often," she began. She told stories about his bravery and their love, but there was always sadness in her eyes. She believed he was lost to the sea. Yet, she kept this quiet hope that one day he might return. Nathan leaned forward. "She never moved on?" Abigail shook her head. "Never. Even in her final days, she spoke to him as if he were still there. It was almost as if she felt his presence." Nathan's stomach churned. James Harrow's torment wasn't just about his death. It was tied to the unresolved love he left behind. Abigail hesitated before continuing. There's something else. Margaret left a diary. It might hold the key to understanding James's pain. The following day, Abigail brought Nathan the diary, its leather cover worn and brittle with age. Together, they opened it, each page revealing fragments of Margaret's life. One entry caught Nathan's eye. The dreams return each night. I see James standing at the shore, beckoning me to follow. His eyes are filled with sorrow, and I cannot reach him. I fear the sea has claimed more than just his body. It has taken his soul. Abigail's voice trembled as she read aloud. She believed James was calling to her. Nathan frowned. But why? If she knew he loved her, why would he be calling her to the sea? Abigail turned the page, her finger tracing the faded ink. Another entry shed light. James spoke of a debt, something he carried with him to his grave. I do not understand its meaning, but he warned me before his final voyage. If he did not return, it would be because of this burden. The words sent a chill down Nathan's spine. A debt? Could James's torment be tied to something more sinister than love? That evening, Nathan returned to his room, the journal and locket sitting on the table. The air felt heavy, and the candlelight flickered unnaturally. He sensed it before it happened. The room grew icy, and James Harrow's ghost materialized, his translucent form shrouded in shadows. "You've learned too much," Harrow growled, his voice a guttural whisper. "The past is not yours to unearth." Nathan stood his ground, clutching the locket. "You wanted me to find her, and I did. Abigail has the answers you seek." "Answers?" Harrow's face twisted in anger. "There are no answers, only the weight of what I left behind. The sea claimed my soul, and now it claims you." Before Nathan could react, the ghost lunged, its icy grip wrapping around his throat. He struggled, gasping for air as darkness closed in around him. Nathan awoke to the sound of heavy knocking at his door. Gasping for breath, he stumbled to open it. Standing there was Father Callahan, his face lined with concern. "I felt something," the priest said, "an unholy presence stronger than before." Nathan nodded, his voice shaky. "He was here. He attacked me." Father Callahan stepped inside, his expression grave. "The spirit grows more powerful the closer you come to uncovering its truth. Whatever binds James to this world must be confronted soon, or it will consume you." Nathan explained what he'd learned about the debt James mentioned. Father Callahan's brow furrowed. A spiritual debt? This could explain his torment. If James committed a grave sin or was wronged in life, his soul may be tethered to the mortal plane until it's resolved. "How do we resolve it?" Nathan asked. "There's a ritual," the priest replied, "but it's dangerous. You must confront him at the source, at the wreck of the Elysian. Only there can the bond be broken." Nathan hesitated before calling Amos again, knowing the diver would be reluctant after their first encounter. Amos's voice was wary over the phone, but the promise of additional payment convinced him to return to the cursed waters. The next morning, they set sail once more, the horizon shrouded in gray mist. Abigail insisted on coming along, clutching her great-grandmother's diary as if it were a shield. "You don't have to do this," Nathan told her. "Yes, I do," Abigail said firmly. "James was my family. If there's a chance to bring him peace, I'll face whatever's down there." The sea seemed angrier this time, the waves churning and the wind howling. Nathan felt the ghost's presence even before they descended, a weight pressing down on his chest. As they approached the wreck, Nathan spotted something he hadn't noticed before. A section of the ship's hold that seemed untouched by time, pulsed faintly, as if alive. Amos hesitated. "I don't like this. We have to see what's inside," Nathan said, steeling his nerves. They pried open the hatch. revealing a small chest hidden within. Inside was a logbook, its pages filled with trembling handwriting. Nathan scanned the entries, his heart sinking as he read. "I have done what I must. The passengers will never know, but the weight of my actions will haunt me forever. The storm approaches, and I fear it will be my reckoning." "What did he do?" Abigail whispered. Nathan found the final entry. "I stole from them all, their trust, their faith. And now the sea demands its price." The realization hit him like a wave. James Harrow had been responsible for the ship's fate. Whether through negligence or malice, he had caused the wreck. The water around them grew turbulent, the ghost of James Harrow appearing in a swirl of fury. "You've uncovered my shame," he bellowed, his form towering and menacing. "I thought I could bury it, but the sea remembers." Nathan held up the locket. "You wanted me to find Margaret. She forgave you. Why can't you forgive yourself?" Harrow's ghost faltered, his glowing eyes dimming. "Forgiveness? It means nothing when the souls of the dead cry out for justice." The wreck trembled, the spirits of those who perished rising from the depths. Their mournful cries filled the water, accusing Harrow of his betrayal. Abigail stepped forward, clutching Margaret's diary. "James, listen to me," she shouted. "Your wife loved you, even after everything. She waited for you, hoping you'd find peace. Don't let your guilt destroy what's left of you." Harrow's ghost turned to her, his expression shifting from rage to anguish. The spirits surrounded him, their cries growing louder. Nathan saw his chance. "James, let us help you. Tell us what you need to make this right." The ghost hesitated, his form flickering. "The debt must be paid. Return what was stolen. Only then can the sea release me." The three sat in Abigail's bookshop later that night, poring over the logbook and Margaret's diary. Father Callahan joined them, his brow furrowed in deep thought. "The debt must be paid," Nathan said, breaking the silence. "But what exactly does that mean? What did James steal?" Abigail traced her finger over one of the logbook entries. "He mentioned taking something from the passengers, something that led to their deaths. If we can figure out what it was, maybe we can return it." Father Callahan nodded. "It may not be a physical item. Could be their trust, their hope, or even their lives." Nathan slammed the book shut, frustration bubbling up. "How are we supposed to return something so intangible? We're dealing with a ghost who's bound to the sea and the spirits of those he wronged. This isn't exactly straightforward." Abigail spoke up, her voice steady. "Maybe it's not about returning what was stolen, but making amends. If James's actions caused their deaths, we need to bring their spirits peace." Father Callahan leaned back, a thoughtful look in his eyes. "A ritual. We need to perform a ceremony at the wreck to release their souls and James's." Nathan frowned. "And if it doesn't work?" The priest's expression turned grim. "Then the sea will take us too." The next day was spent preparing for the ritual. Father Callahan provided holy water, candles, and a tome filled with ancient prayers meant to cleanse restless spirits. Abigail brought the locket and Margaret's diary, believing they would serve as a connection to James's humanity. Nathan, ever the skeptic, made sure to bring practical tools. Diving gear, flashlights, and a flare gun, just in case things went south. As the sun dipped below the horizon, they loaded their supplies onto Amos's boat. The weather was eerily calm, the sea unnervingly still. "This feels like the calm before the storm," Amos muttered, his usual bravado replaced with unease. Nathan nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Let's just hope we make it back." The wreck of the Elysian loomed in the dark waters, its skeletal frame a ghostly shadow beneath the surface. As they descended, Nathan felt the familiar weight pressing on his chest. The presence of the spirits was stronger now, their energy almost tangible. Father Callahan began setting up the ritual near the ship's bow, where they had found the logbook. Abigail held the locket tightly, her lips moving in a silent prayer. Nathan shone his flashlight around the wreck, the beam cutting through the murky water. Shadows danced at the edges of his vision, and he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. "Let's get this over with," Amos said, his voice crackling through the radio. Father Callahan lit the candles, their flames burning bright despite the water's oppressive darkness. He opened the tome and began reciting the prayers, his voice steady and commanding. Abigail placed the locket and diary in the center of the circle they had formed, their significance anchoring the ritual. Nathan stood guard, his eyes scanning the wreck for any sign of James Harrow's ghost. The air, or rather, the water, seemed to grow colder with each passing moment. As Father Callahan's voice rose, the spirits began to appear. Ethereal figures emerged from the wreck, their faces twisted in pain and sorrow. They floated around the circle, their mournful cries echoing in Nathan's ears. "We're here to help you," Abigail said, her voice trembling. "Please, let us bring you peace." One of the spirits stepped forward, a woman with hollow eyes and translucent skin. "Our lives were stolen," she said, her voice a haunting whisper. "We trusted him, and he betrayed us." The water around them churned violently as James Harrow's ghost materialized, his form towering and menacing. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," he bellowed, his voice filled with anguish. "The storm was supposed to cover my tracks, not take the ship." The spirits surged toward him, their cries growing louder. "You lied to us," one shouted. "You took everything from us." Nathan stepped forward, his voice firm. "James, you can't keep running from this. You have to face what you did." Harrow's ghost turned to Nathan, his expression a mix of anger and despair. "You think I haven't? Every moment of my existence has been consumed by guilt. But what can I do now? They're gone, and so am I." Father Callahan raised his hands, his voice cutting through the chaos. "You can make amends. Accept responsibility for your actions and seek forgiveness." Harrow hesitated, his form flickering. "Forgiveness? After what I've done?" Abigail stepped forward, holding the locket out to him. "Margaret forgave you. She loved you even after she knew the truth. If she can forgive you, maybe they can too." The spirits gathered around, their expressions unreadable. The woman who had spoken earlier stepped forward again. "If you truly seek forgiveness, you must prove it. Return what you stole and accept the consequences." James Harrow's ghost bowed his head. "I will do whatever it takes." Father Callahan nodded and began the final prayer, his voice rising above the storm of emotions swirling around them. The spirits watched in silence, their forms glowing faintly as the ritual progressed. The candles burned brighter, their light cutting through the darkness. The locket and diary seemed to pulse with energy, anchoring James to the circle. Just as it seemed the ritual was working, the water erupted in a violent surge. A dark, shadowy figure emerged from the depths, its presence more menacing than anything Nathan had felt before. "What is that?" Abigail gasped, clutching Nathan's arm. Father Callahan's face paled. "It's the sea itself. It doesn't want to let him go." The shadow lunged toward James Harrow, its tendrils wrapping around his ghostly form. He cried out in pain, his voice echoing in the water. "Help me," he pleaded, his eyes locking onto Nathan's. Nathan hesitated, the flare gun in his hand feeling heavier than ever. "What do we do?" Father Callahan's voice was grim. "You have to choose. Save him or let the sea take him." Nathan raised the flare gun, his heart pounding. "I don't even know if this will work. Trust yourself." Abigail said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. With a deep breath, Nathan fired the flare, the bright light cutting through the darkness and striking the shadow. It recoiled with a deafening screech, releasing James Harrow. The flare's crimson light dissipated, leaving the waters eerily calm once again. The shadowy figure retreated into the abyss, its presence lingering like a heavy weight in the water. Nathan's heart hammered in his chest, and his grip on the flare gun trembled. Father Callahan broke the silence. The sea may have retreated for now, but it's far from over. We've angered something far greater. James Harrow's ghost floated before them, flickering like a dying flame. You shouldn't have saved me. It would have been better for all of us if I were taken. Nathan stepped forward, anger flashing in his eyes. We didn't come this far to let you be dragged into whatever abyss that was. Now, tell us, what else are you hiding? Abigail placed a steadying hand on Nathan's arm. Let's focus on finishing the ritual. There's still a chance to make this right. Harrow's expression darkened. You don't understand. The sea doesn't just take, it consumes. It's not done with me, and now it's not done with you. They ascended to the surface, the wreck of the Elysian disappearing into the darkness below. As Amos steered the boat back to shore, an unnatural fog enveloped them. The air grew heavy, and the waves began to churn despite the calm sky above. Father Callahan held his rosary tightly, muttering prayers under his breath. This isn't just a storm, it's a warning. Nathan looked at James, who sat at the edge of the boat, staring into the water. What did you do, Harrow? Why is the sea coming for us now? James hesitated, his form shimmering as though the ghostly chains binding him were tightening. I told you everything. At least I thought I had. But there's something else. Something I buried deep, even from myself. Abigail leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. You need to remember, James. If you don't, we're all doomed. James closed his eyes, his face contorted in pain as fragments of his past flooded back. It wasn't just the passengers' belongings, he whispered. I took something more, a pendant from one of the women. She said it was her family's most sacred possession, meant to protect them from the sea's wrath. I didn't believe her. I thought it was just another trinket. Nathan's fists clenched. And where is it now? James's ghost wavered, his voice barely audible. I threw it into the ocean when the storm came. I thought it was cursed. But I was the curse. Abigail's face paled. That pendant must be the key. If we can retrieve it and return it, maybe the spirits will find peace. Father Callahan shook his head. The sea won't give it up easily. It will demand a price. As the fog thickened, the waves grew violent, tossing the boat like a toy. Amos fought to keep them steady, his knuckles white as he gripped the wheel. This isn't natural, he shouted over the roar of the water. We're sitting ducks out here. Suddenly, ghostly figures begin rising from the waves, their hollow eyes glowing with an unearthly light. The spirits from the Elysian had returned, their mournful wails echoing across the sea. They're coming for us, Abigail cried, clutching the locket. Nathan raised the flare gun again, but Father Callahan stopped him. No, violence will only make it worse. We need to show them we're here to help. Abigail stepped forward, holding the locket high. We're trying to right the wrongs that were done to you. Please, let us make amends. One of the spirits, the woman they had seen earlier, stepped closer. The sea does not forgive easily, she said, her voice like the wind. But if you are truly willing to pay the price, the path to the pendant will reveal itself. The spirit extended a ghostly hand toward Abigail. Come with us. The sea will test your resolve. Before anyone could protest, Abigail found herself pulled into the water by the spirit. Nathan and Father Callahan shouted her name, but she disappeared into the dark waves. Nathan didn't hesitate. He strapped on his diving gear and plunged into the water after her. The icy cold gripped him, but his determination burned hotter. As he descended, he saw Abigail below, surrounded by the spirits. They seemed to guide her deeper into the abyss, toward a glowing point of light. "Abigail," he called, his voice muffled by the water. She turned, her face a mixture of fear and resolve. "They're taking me to the pendant, Nathan. I have to do this." Nathan swam toward her, the pressure in his chest growing with every stroke. The spirits parted, allowing him to join her. The glowing light led them to a cavern beneath the wreck. Inside, the pendant rested on a jagged rock, its surface shimmering with an otherworldly glow. Abigail reached for it, but a sudden force knocked her back. The shadowy figure they had seen earlier appeared, its presence overwhelming. "You dare to take what belongs to the sea," it hissed, its voice reverberating through the water. Nathan stepped forward, his flare gun aimed at the creature. "We're here to make things right. Let us take the pendant and end this." The shadow laughed, a sound that sent chills down their spines. "The sea does not bargain. If you want the pendant, you must prove your worth." The shadow conjured visions of their worst fears. For Abigail, it was the drowning faces of the passengers from the Elysian, their accusing eyes fixed on her. For Nathan, it was the ghostly image of his crewmates, blaming him for their deaths. "You cannot escape the weight of your sins," the shadow taunted. But Abigail clenched her fists, her voice steady. "We're not here to escape. We're here to atone." Nathan stepped beside her, his voice resolute. "We've faced worse than you. If we can bring peace to those you've tormented, then so be it." The shadow paused, its form flickering. "Very well. Take the pendant, but know this, you may not survive the cost." Abigail reached out, her fingers closing around the pendant. As soon as she touched it, the cavern trembled, and the spirits surrounding them began to glow. "The path is not yet complete," the woman's voice echoed in their minds. "Return the pendant to its rightful place, and the sea may grant you peace." The shadow vanished, leaving Abigail and Nathan alone in the cavern. They exchanged a look, the weight of their task heavy on their shoulders. "We have the pendant," Abigail said, her voice trembling. "But what price will the sea demand next?" The pendant glowed faintly in Abigail's trembling hands as she and Nathan ascended from the cavern. The oppressive weight of the water seemed to grow with each stroke, the sea unwilling to let them go. Around them, faint whispers swirled, echoing through the depths. When they finally broke through the surface, the boat was barely visible in the thick fog. Father Callahan and Amos shouted their names, their voices muffled and distant. "Over here," Nathan yelled, his voice hoarse. They reached the boat with labored strokes. Abigail handed the pendant to Father Callahan, who stared at it in awe. "This is no ordinary object," he murmured. "The power in this pendant is ancient. It's not just a symbol, it's a beacon. It calls to the sea, and everything within it." Amos glanced nervously at the churning water. "Then we'd better finish this before the sea takes it back." As they sailed toward the nearest island to complete the ritual, the sea grew darker, its waves rising like great beasts. The spirits of the Elysian swirled around the boat, their hollow eyes fixed on the pendant. Abigail spoke softly. "I think the pendant belonged to the woman we saw. She wasn't just a passenger. She was something more." Father Callahan nodded. The pendant wasn't merely protection. It was a ward, a barrier keeping the sea's wrath at bay. When Harrow stole it, he doomed everyone aboard. Nathan's gaze hardened. "Then we need to put it back where it belongs. What do we do?" Father Callahan opened his worn journal, flipping through the pages. The pendant must be returned to the altar where it was blessed. If we fail, the sea will claim not just us, but everyone it touches. Amos's voice was grim. Then we'd better hope the altar is still standing after all this time. The closer they sailed to the island, the angrier the sea became. Waves lashed at the boat, and the wind howled like a chorus of tormented souls. Nathan gripped the wheel alongside Amos, their muscles straining against the storm. Abigail and Father Callahan clung to the pendant, its glow pulsing with every crash of the waves. Suddenly, a massive wave loomed ahead, towering over the boat. "Hold on!" Nathan shouted as the wave crashed down, drenching them in icy water. When the boat stabilized, they saw a jagged silhouette rising from the sea. The island was a stark, desolate place, its cliffs jagged and sharp like broken teeth. "There it is," Father Callahan said, pointing toward a crumbling stone structure at the island's center. The altar. They anchored the boat and scrambled onto the rocky shore. The air was thick with the stench of salt and decay, and the ground was slick with seaweed. The spirits of the Elysian followed, their ghostly forms flickering in and out of sight. Among them was the woman, her gaze fixed on Abigail. "This is the place," she said, her voice a whisper carried on the wind. "You must hurry. The sea will not wait." As they climbed toward the altar, the ground trembled beneath their feet. The shadowy figure from the depths appeared again, its form towering over them. "You think you can undo what was done?" It hissed, its voice like the crashing of waves. "The sea's wrath cannot be silenced." Nathan stepped forward, holding the flare gun. "We're not here to fight you. We're here to make amends." The shadow laughed, a sound that chilled them to the bone. "Amends? You cannot erase what has been done. The sea demands its price." They reached the altar, a weathered stone slab etched with strange, ancient symbols. Father Callahan placed the pendant in its center and began chanting in a low, steady voice. The wind howled louder, and the spirits gathered around them, their faces filled with a mixture of hope and fear. The shadow loomed closer, its form swirling like a storm. "You cannot stop me," it growled. "The sea will take what it is owed." Abigail stepped forward, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "You've taken enough. Let them go." The shadow's gaze shifted to her. "You would sacrifice yourself for them?" Nathan grabbed her arm. "Abigail, no." She shook him off. "If that's what it takes to end this, then yes." The shadow surged forward, its form enveloping Abigail. She gasped as visions of the shipwreck flooded her mind. The screams of the passengers, the cold grip of the water, and the weight of the lives lost. But she held her ground. "I won't run. If you want me, take me. But let the others go." The shadow paused, its form flickering. "Your sacrifice is noble, but it is not enough. The sea demands more." Nathan stepped beside her, his jaw set. "Then take me too." Father Callahan's voice rose over the storm as he completed the chant. The pendant glowed brighter, its light piercing through the shadow. The spirits of the Elysian began to rise, their forms glowing with a warm, golden light. The woman stepped forward, her gaze softening. "You've done enough. The sea has heard your plea." The shadow screamed, its form dissolving into the air. The spirits ascended, their faces peaceful at last. The storm began to subside, the waves growing calm and the wind dying down. Abigail fell to her knees, the weight of the ordeal finally hitting her. Nathan and Father Callahan helped her to her feet. "It's over," Nathan said, his voice barely above a whisper. Abigail looked at the now empty altar, the pendant gone. "Is it? Or has the sea just given us a reprieve?" Father Callahan's face was grim. The sea is never truly at peace. But for now, we've done what we can. As they made their way back to the boat, the sun broke through the clouds, casting a golden light over the island. Amos greeted them with a relieved smile. I don't know what you did up there, but the sea's gone quiet. Let's get out of here before it changes its mind. As they sailed away, Nathan couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching them. The sea's surface was calm, but beneath it, the darkness lingered. Do you think it's really over? Abigail asked. Nathan looked back at the island, now a distant silhouette. I don't know, but whatever happens, we face it together. The sea stretched wide and calm, a mirror reflecting the golden hues of the setting sun. The boat glided smoothly over the waves, its passengers weary but relieved. Abigail leaned against the railing, the salty breeze brushing her face. Nathan approached, his expression unreadable. We're alive. That's more than I dared to hope for. Abigail nodded. It feels empty now, like something is missing. Father Callahan overheard and joined them, his voice solemn. The spirits are at rest, but we must be cautious. The sea is mercurial. It does not forget. Amos steered the boat in silence, his eyes scanning the horizon. Let's just get back to land. I've had enough of ghosts and curses to last a lifetime. As night fell, the calm began to feel unnatural. The water was too still, the air too heavy. Abigail felt the hairs on her arms rise as an inexplicable chill crept over her. Nathan's voice broke the silence. Do you hear that? They all paused, straining to listen. Faintly, carried on the wind, was the sound of a woman's voice. A mournful melody, haunting and beautiful, rising and falling like the waves. It's her, Abigail whispered. The woman from the ship. Father Callahan frowned. No, this isn't her. This is something else. Before anyone could respond, the boat lurched violently. A wave, sudden and unnatural, crashed over the deck. The air filled with the sound of wailing, and the shadows on the water seemed to move with purpose. Out of the darkness, a figure emerged, tall, cloaked in the shifting shadows of the sea. It was the specter of Captain Harrow, his hollow eyes burning with malevolence. You thought you could escape? His voice boomed, the sound echoing across the waves. The sea is mine, and so are you. Nathan grabbed the flare gun, his hands shaking. We did what we had to. Let us go. Harrow sneered. You meddled in what you do not understand. The sea's debt is not yet paid. Abigail stepped forward, her voice steady despite the fear gripping her. You caused this. You stole the pendant and you doomed your crew. The sea demands justice, not vengeance. The specter laughed, a cold, hollow sound. You think you can lecture me? You are nothing but pawns in the sea's endless game. The water around the boat churned, rising in towering walls that blocked out the stars. Within the waves, faces appeared, twisted, anguished, pleading for release. Father Callahan raised his hands, shouting over the cacophony. See, hear us. We've returned the pendant, fulfilled the ritual. Release us from this curse. The waves paused, the faces staring silently. Then, a voice, deep and resonant, filled the air. It was not Harrow, but something older, more powerful. You have returned what was stolen, the voice said. But the balance is not yet restored. Abigail felt a pull in her chest, as if the sea itself was reaching for her. What more do you want? A life, the voice replied. The sea claims one more life. Silence fell over the boat as the words sank in. Nathan stepped forward. Take me. Abigail grabbed his arm. No, you can't. Nathan turned to her, his expression resolute. If it's the only way to end this, I'll do it. I can't let you or anyone else suffer because of me. Father Callahan tried to intervene. There must be another way. The sea is not a god to be bargained with. The voice returned, calm but unyielding. The choice is yours. Resist and all will be lost. Accept and balance will be restored. Nathan met Abigail's tearful gaze. This is my choice. Nathan stepped to the edge of the boat, the water lapping at the sides like an eager predator. The pendant, glowing faintly, hovered above his hand. Abigail clung to him. There has to be another way. We can fight this. He shook his head, a sad smile on his lips. Sometimes, the only way to win is to let go. As he stepped into the water, it enveloped him like a lover's embrace. The waves calmed, the faces in the water fading one by one. The specter of Captain Harrow dissolved, his form scattering like mist. The sea grew still, the stars reflected in its surface once more. When dawn broke, the boat drifted gently toward the shore. The survivors stood in silence, the weight of the night pressing on their hearts. Abigail sat at the bow, staring out at the endless horizon. Nathan's absence was a void she could not fill. Father Callahan placed a hand on her shoulder. He gave us a gift. His sacrifice saved us all. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. But the sea never forgets. What if it comes back? He looked out at the waves, his expression grim. Then we'll be ready,